high impact Web3 grants programs. And I'm going to be talking about a specific tool that has been introduced in this wonderful book that most of you are looking at right now. Just quickly about me, I'm Coach Jay. I've had the privilege of working at Gitcoin for the last 2.5 years, really just trying to completely change the game in the on-chain capital allocation space. And I've done a number of roles, but I've really had the opportunity over the last several months to dive into the world of grants program design. And as a result of that work, I was able to put together kind of like a design canvas, the tool that we're calling the grants program design canvas. So I'm gonna flip to this here. This is what it looks like here. Basically, this is your go-to tool for how to design a grants program. It's a visual, modularized framework for how to launch and grow a grants program. And it just really streamlines the planning approach so that this really complex grants program planning process can be like minimized, and you can spend less time planning a program and more time actually attracting builders into your ecosystem. And so there's 4 phases here. You can see it's define, design, execute, and learn. I'm going to dive into each one, and they have quadrants underneath it as well. But you can see that, has anyone here heard of the business model canvas as well? I see some hands. Yeah, so the business model canvas came out in about 2010, and it really completely changed the startup space because it made this rapid iteration possible with this really difficult process of planning a business. And when I was planning in business school, like when I was learning how to like write business plans and stuff like that, that stuff would take weeks. And so the business model canvas, which came out right after I finished business school, of course, it shortened that process. You could iterate on a viable business model in 20 minutes instead of like what it took me was like 20 days to just come up with one idea, right? So that's kind of the hope with this. You can launch and grow your grants program and without missing any details either, kind of like checklist manifesto style, right? You just make sure that it captures everything. And I use the terms launch and grow very intentionally. First is launching. So if there are individuals out there that might be you looking to launch a grants program, so you don't have anything right now, you can use this tool to kind of plan out and map out how your grants program is going to look. And also grow. So this is also meant for existing grants programs. Existing grants programs that maybe want to iterate, optimize their grants programs can actually use the canvas to really take a look operationally at how they're running their grants program and if it's actually creating the impact that they're wanting to create. So who this is for, by role, it's for new ecosystem leaders and veteran ecosystem growth leads. So whether you're familiar with all the levers you can pull to grow your ecosystem or not, this is for you. And it's also, like I said, for new programs and existing programs. You're also hearing me use the word ecosystem a lot. That's because at Gitcoin, we've had the opportunity to work with some of the largest ecosystems in Web3. But this tool isn't necessarily only for these like large tokenized ecosystems. This is for pre-token organizations. This is for community groups. It's for impact networks. Anyone who really wants to put together a grants program, like an incentives program, where you're taking in applications and you're doling out, whether it's funds or services or something like that, you can use this framework. So here's what we're going to do in the next 5 minutes. We're going to dive into each of these quadrants. We're going to talk at you for about 5 minutes, and then we can go into some questions, and depending on how much time we have, we can even do a demo. Okay, so let's look at the define phase. The define phase is what I would call your funding allocation strategy. So this is really setting up the foundation of how it is that you want to actually allocate funds that you might have in a shared treasury or whatnot. You're going to start with your objectives, probably the part that most people skip over. I know I've spoken to a few of you in an interview, and we all agree that this is probably the most important and the part that folks spend the least amount of time of is actually setting your objectives. Like, what change do you want to create, right? And how you're setting your objectives is going to be really important, not only because you're determining what you want to fund, but you're determining how that aligns with your organization's mission and vision, how that aligns with budget constraints you might have, how that aligns with the scope of the program that you're actually creating. So there's all these considerations with the objectives. And in the book, the playbook that accompanies this canvas, it actually goes into a lot of those details. So you can actually follow along in a wonderful little worksheet. The next step is measurement. So, I want to grow my ecosystem. Cool. How are we measuring that growth, right? What kind of indicators are we using? So maybe a large ecosystem like an Arbitrum or Optimism, they're looking at daily active users, right? So that might be a key result that they're really aiming for. What are some of the leading indicators that actually lead to developing those key results as well? So this kind of helps you start to map out what you're actually going to measure in terms of what the success looks like. Then you got to get into the audience. Mostly we've identified two main audiences that you want to focus on at first. The first is the actual builders that you may want to attract into your ecosystem. So who are these people? Where are they hanging out? What kind of skill sets do they have? What level of experience do they have? And there's also the beneficiaries. So especially important, well, it's important for everyone, but I thought about impact networks and community groups, like they're thinking about their end beneficiary as well. But for an ecosystem, that might be their end users, right? Actually interviewing them, what's going to actually benefit them, right? So keeping that in mind as well. And then at the bottom there's funding. So where are you getting your money, right? So if you're in a large DAO, it might be like, what does that governance process look like? How are you navigating that? And if you're an impact group or a community group or whatever it is, how are you fundraising for that? Where are you going to get those funds? And then how are you going to liaise with those fundraisers? How are you going to pitch the benefits of actually funding some sort of grant pool? Next, we'll move into design. We'll move into funding mechanisms. Obviously, the sexiest and most wonderful and fun part of Web3. But this is where you're kind of choosing whether you're going to do like a direct grants program, you're going to do a kind of like a retro funding round, you're going to do maybe quadratic voting like Gitcoin or something else. We have lots of different mechanisms being built on Allo right now, like conviction voting and assurance contracts and Macy and all this kind of good stuff. So this is where you would choose that, and there's pros and cons to each one. There's no right or wrong way to go. It depends what you want to accomplish based on your objectives. See how they're tied. Eligibility criteria, what has you say yes or no to people that are applying. Then you go into the application and timeline. It's pretty straightforward timeline. Like what's the intake period, what's the processing, and what's that payout period? What are the dates for that? An appeals process that you might want to have in place. And then the actual application as well. So how are you structuring your application to make it as easy as possible for people to apply, but also making it a little bit difficult so you kind of keep out the junk applications, the bots, the bad actors, etc. And also considering what kind of questions you're asking. So are the questions measurable? A huge thing that we think about at Gitcoin is, are the questions scalable? So it's nice to ask like, hey, give me a link to your website, and reviewing 20 applications with their website. But then when you get 1,000 applications, it's a lot less scalable of a question, right? So those are some things to consider when you're creating your application. Then you get into roles and responsibilities. So how are you going to build your dream team that's going to operate your grants program? Engagement, how are you getting the word out about your program? Also, how are you onboarding grantees? How are you supporting them and communicating with them as they're participating in your grants program and after your grants program? And then lastly, disbursement in the execute section, which is really just about the payout. What's the cadence? Are you streaming funds or using a tool like Drips? Or is it milestone-based payouts? Or are you using your native token or a stable? All that kind of, those considerations would be in disbursement here. And then lastly, you're learning. So you're going to run a retrospective. The most important thing here is actually do one. So run a retrospective. And then reporting. So just considering what channels you're going to use, who are your stakeholders, what information they want to know. Eugene and I were having a conversation about this, how because we're in this on-chain world, there's so much data you can use, and how are you really drilling that noise down to like the really high signal information that your stakeholders actually want to know about. So that's kind of where you're going to consider it in the reporting section. So that's the canvas. Like, just talked at you for 5 minutes, but these are these 12 quadrants that you can use. You can see that it kind of captures the world of a grants program in there. There's probably some nuances that maybe aren't captured, but the idea, again, is to streamline that process and really make it easy to launch and grow a grants program. And like I said, there's this company playbook that everyone here got. And if you're talking to anyone, afterwards, you can tell them to go to grantscanvas.gitcoin.co. They can get their own copy. You can also download the actual canvas itself. It's so easy to pop into a Miro board or a Mural, whatever your favorite whiteboarding software is. It's all free. So it's this amazing open source tool that you can use. And we can just like really transform the world of grants and just show how easy it is to grow an ecosystem, grow a community with running a grants program. That's it. Hey, how much time do we have here? I think
we have like 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes, cool. So there's two things we can do here. What I can do is, let me actually show you if I can actually get my computer really quickly. Laura, do you mind? Right, it's just in the back corner there near the water. What I'm going to do is I've actually mapped out a couple of grants programs in the space. I've mapped out 2 programs. We can take a look at both of them if we have time. One was the Uniswap grants program. It's been one of the longest running grants programs in Web3. And I also did a look at Optimism's Retro 4 funding round, their on-chain builders round. And what we can do here is we can actually take a look at what those programs look like using the canvas. How does that sound? We do that for 5 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. So, Pungar, do you mind if you help me
Yeah.
get my computer hooked up here? Fair play?
Or there you go.
Yeah, let's get the cable going.
Okay.
Yeah. So my tech person's just going to get this set up here. And what's great about this is when you're running through the actual canvas, you can do this as quickly or as slowly as you want. So I ran a demo like this yesterday at EthCC, and we did about 20 minutes. And we just got through the first column, and that was great. It just really gave him a solid foundation for what it is that he was looking to create with his grants program. We were planning our citizen grants program at Gitcoin as well, and we did that over the course of 2 sessions over about 2 hours. But it was really much more in depth, and we got to have a much more nuanced discussion of what it is that we were actually creating. So you could do something that's like super high level just to get a sense of what you want to create. And you can also use it as a framework to do deep dives into the details of what it is that you're going to be doing with your grants program. Is it easier to airplay? Yeah, go for it. This one, maybe? And I'll say. All right, well, you might have to take my word that it's really good.
We also have additional copies too, if we didn't get one.
Yeah, if anyone didn't get one, we can,
Can I ask you a
yeah,
question?
let's get some questions while we're waiting, yeah.
Yeah, it can be useful for people as well. When you say grant, I mean, I think you understand. I understand what you mean because I'm in the space since a while, but it's a bit all kind of funding process, no? It's like ecosystem development, funding for nonprofits. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. So maybe clarifying it would be more interesting for everybody because maybe you're like, I don't do grants, and then actually you find out that yeah, you can do what you have in your mind with this tool. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I appreciate you bringing up that nuance. So like, we're all here because we maybe have a sense of what grants are. But really this canvas, like one name that I was exploring was the incentives program design canvas, because it's really any incentives based program. Any program, again, at the nuts and bolts of it is that if there's some sort of application that requires people to apply, there's like an eligibility criteria thing, and then there's something being given out in exchange for that program, it can be used. Now grants, technically, like, they have a whole definition to them. They're not quite bounties, they're much larger than bounties, they tend to have milestones, etc. But any kind of allocation, usually of funds, but maybe of services, etc., can essentially be used with this framework. Does that help?
Yeah.
I appreciate you giving me the little volley there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Who should be involved in using this or going through a co-design sort of process? What's the experience?
That is a great question. Who should be involved, right? Usually I don't have a ton of experience. I mean, this is a newer tool, so we're still just getting this ramped up in terms of like seeing how ecosystems out there, groups are using it out there. My intuitive recommendation is, of course, someone needs to start this. Someone who's kind of like a leader in an organization or a group needs to have the impetus to actually get the conversation started. But at the end of the day, you may want to do several iterations of this. I think one thing that a lot of people miss, especially in our space, is actually engaging with the community and seeing what they think. I know that at Gitcoin, a few folks that are using the GrantStack tool, I think it's like Zuzalu and maybe Scroll as well, have engaged in decentralized processes for setting out eligibility criteria and things like that. So the more that you can expand input of people, I think the better, the more you can incorporate that kind of feedback. I think it's more effective there. We may or may not. We got 2 people here now. This is a serious commitment too. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think there is a possibility that government organizations will be using this?
Let's hope so. I don't know what they're using right now. I don't know how they're planning their grants programs. They must be missing some steps because I know I planned our citizen grants program at first at Gitcoin, and wow, did I miss so many things. So I think that government organizations could do this, philanthropic organizations, academic institutions. There may not be as many nuances around like payouts, like they're not deciding between stables and their native tokens, right? But at the end of the day, the steps still follow, right? They're setting up what it is that they want to do, what is it that they want to fund, how are they determining the eligibility of applications, and then they're reporting on the learnings, etc. Yeah.
There is an e-grant program running at European Commission, so they've been just hiring people left, right, and center. So maybe you want to.
That's great. I'm finishing up the Gitcoin at the end of the month, so I got a job lead right here. This is great. This is super. Thank you. Yeah, Rev.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, I assume you analyze a couple of different grants programs, so what is perhaps the established grants program process, or just a pattern that you've seen, which is like completely inefficient that this canvas can help solve?
I would say that there has been almost no pattern to establishing grants programs, and I think that's why I'm really excited about this tool. You know, if we can get this, it sounds like we won't get this set up, but we can talk afterwards. I'll show you the mapping that I did of like Uniswap grants program and Optimism's grants program. Kudos to Jonas, like it was super easy for the Optimism one to kind of map that out. Most of the details are on their governance forum. It's just listed in like a super long wall of text, classic Web3. But the Uniswap grants program, I actually had a really hard time filling out like half of the quadrants. Some of the information was available, but a lot of it wasn't. Even though they would say that they're reporting it and, you know, you can follow up for more KPIs and blah, blah, blah. And I had to like dig and I still couldn't find a lot of stuff. And I spent like hours looking through old governance forum posts and still couldn't quite get it. So I would say that in terms of the patterns for planning, I don't know. Like when I was planning my first grants program, like I just looked at what other people were doing. And so like if they also were looking at what other people were doing and then they were looking at what other people were doing and that very first person was just, you know, pulling it out of their butt, sounds like there was not like much of a planning pattern in the first place. And I hope that this could create at least some structure and framework for us to move with.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. Any more? I think that's it. Oh, Eugene's got one. Oh, this is gonna be a hard one, I can tell.
Don't worry. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see, as some people brought up, as like different type of grant programs run through it, especially if there are going to be ways to see of kind of which type of orgs focus on which part of the canvas more, and yeah, where Web3 might be concentrated in that design versus some government or nonprofit agencies might do a lot more on kind of the initial planning. Are there any plans to do kind of very public sessions to run people through this in a way that you can like bring together some of these audiences and get a sense of how different it is across spaces?
Not right now, but I'm smelling a little collaboration with MetaGov and Gitcoin. So maybe in the near future there will be. One of the questions I get, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of like the different focus areas. One of the questions that I get the most around this are in the measurement quadrant. Like, I think that's kind of like what this space is really hungry to solve, is like the measurement and impact reporting kind of challenges. I definitely do not feel qualified to talk about that, but I'm really glad that Eugene's going to be talking next because he is much smarter than me and much more knowledgeable around the topic. So here, we'll take one last question and I think we're wrapping up, right, Pukar?
Yeah, I mean, this is really cool stuff. Like, really like that you put it together. Like, also like for everyone and not just for Web3. What is the next step for this? Because I would love to, I guess, like following up on Eugene's question, like where, you know, like maybe even like do research on this in terms of like where kind of like the Web3 space fits, or maybe even individual grant programs or ecosystems like do more and less, and kind of what are the outcomes based on that, and actually like mapping that out, and then have some best practices, even like learnings. In addition to kind of like just a canvas, what are some of the plans for that?
Yeah, in terms of next steps, I mean, at the end of the day, like, I don't have a strong answer for you. I think that it kind of sounds like, you know, one of my major aspirations for this, when we were first kind of thinking about this and really manifesting this, what's so neat about this is at Gitcoin, we're talking a lot about, you know, changing and revolutionizing the on-chain capital allocation space. And we want people to enter the space and help us solve these problems that we know exist. And one of the things that this canvas does is it actually distinguishes the different design spaces within the on-chain capital allocation space. So like unintentionally, Gitcoin came up with this amazing tool called Checker. And it's this LLM-based tool that you can run your applications through, and it spits out why or why not folks are accepted or rejected, et cetera, and you can share that with your grantees. And so one of the biggest problems that grant program managers had is this application review process. It's definitely the longest, most burdensome process. In the grants campus design, there's nothing to like really plan about it. You just kind of got to do the review process. And I know like during grants rounds, like at Gitcoin, like we just have like huge teams just like working around the clock to like get it all done before the timeline, right? And so we had this tool that was created. It's called Checker. You can talk to Gitcoin if you're interested in trying it out for your ecosystem. And that sits nicely right here in this quadrant. And so like that's so cool because now we've distinguished that there's this challenge in applications, and we can now solve that problem. There's another challenge in applications that someone brought up yesterday with grantees being dissuaded from applying for grants programs because they're filling out so many applications. It's just like a ton of work for them. How do we solve that problem as well? How do we solve more problems around making marketing turnkey? Right, that's like a huge challenge for a lot of ecosystems out there. People look to Gitcoin a lot for that. How do we solve some of the challenges around that? Obviously, measurement and reporting as well are some obvious spaces that the social impact space and philanthropic spaces have been trying to solve for a long time. How do we in Web3 start working on the design spaces? So in terms of next steps, let's you and I connect at least, and we can at least maybe have more of a conversation about taking on some of these design spaces together and seeing how we can solve them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Amazing. Thank you very much for the gifts. And now we welcome our another speaker, and